Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Romani Varanasi, and I'm the CEO of Xbiotics Therapeutics. On behalf of the Lioness magazine, which is the leading voice in journalism for female entrepreneurs, I am very pleased to be joined today by Elizabeth Gazda, who is the CEO of Ember Labs. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you, Romani. So nice to be here.
I'm really glad you joined us today, and in particular, I'm really glad you said yes to speaking with me, Liz. You are the CEO of Ember Labs since 2018, if I'm not mistaken. And Ember Labs is the first thermal digital therapeutic company which is focused on wellness and health. And you guys are really pioneering a new pathway to unlock the therapeutic power of temperature. And so I'm in the biopharma field, as you know, and your technology, your approach, your company is something very unique in terms of what I've encountered. And so I'm really curious to get into this discussion with you. But before we go there, let me just introduce you a little bit to the audience. So you have a wide range of experiences in founding, starting up companies and in startup environments. Prior to Ember, you were a member of several founding teams, including a fintech company, a music technology company, and you've also worked with at a number of Boston's fastest growing companies, including MQ, which was acquired by a company called VeriSign, I think, and then a unicorn art technology group that was acquired by Oracle. And you began your career in the consumer electronics space at Philips in the Netherlands. So you've got a wide range of experiences, and now you're essentially at a health tech company, a digital technology company that's working on wellness and health. So we're going to kind of navigate to get us there, but welcome again. And what I'd like to start you off with, Liz, is tell us a little bit about Ember and what it means to be a digital therapeutic company using temperature as essentially your technology tool here.
Yeah, thank you. Ember is really a fascinating company. It all started at MIT when three material scientists were working together in a laboratory, working on their, PhDs, and discovered themselves in an over air conditioned laboratory in the middle of the summer. It was about 95 degrees outside in Boston, and it was about 45 degrees inside in the lab. And they had down jackets on, and they said, "This is ridiculous. Why are we still controlling human comfort from a thermostat on the wall?" So MIT happened to have a hackathon going on in the wearables sector, and they decided to try to actuate a change in temperature perception from the human body. And so they dove into the human science of temperature, and they looked at the material science that would be required to build something like this, and built a rough prototype that you could wear, on the inside of your wrist that would stimulate the thermoreceptors that are concentrated on the inside of your wrist. You have both hot and cold thermoreceptors on the inside of your wrist. And if you could stimulate those thermoreceptors with temperature, they discovered you could actually hack the brain into feeling different. You could feel a 5-degree difference in either direction, either from the warming or the cooling, just by actuating that area of the skin on the inside of the wrist.
Wow. And so this came from MIT. And so did they seek funding immediately, or were they sort of in a funded lab and they were working on this in that lab through their funding? How did it all start? How did the funding come through initially?
Well, actually, the story goes on a little bit further from there, if you'll allow me. They entered this hackathon just hoping to win the $10,000. And they won the hackathon. The MIT media office put the story out on the wire, and it got picked up by the Weather Channel and a couple of other news outlets. And they started to get thousands of emails from people around the world saying, "When can I buy this thing? Temperature is the biggest problem I have in my life." And it was really then that they said, "There's something here. We want to explore this." And just got a little bit of seed funding and went to work to really optimize the technology, because it's very difficult to build something small and cold. That takes a lot of innovation. If you think about all the things in your life that are cold, they tend to be large and noisy and consume a lot of power, like your refrigerator or your air conditioner. So that was a real technical challenge. And then they needed to understand what was happening in human physiology. And what they discovered was that static temperature simply doesn't work. You need to apply moving temperature or waveforms. And so it's the waveforms that keep those thermoreceptors firing and the brain stimulated. Now, what they didn't anticipate is that beyond changing perception of temperature, that they would discover a new pathway to the brain through temperature sensation. It's a completely different path than, for example, touch. And so we know that temperature is processed in the part of the brain where the autonomic nervous system is balanced. And so what we're doing is using temperature to balance the autonomic nervous system.
Interesting. Okay, so this is effectively a personal thermal regulation, almost like temperature made personal type of approach here.
It is, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about then. So it looks like a watch. So it's a device you wear on your wrist, and it controls temperature 5 degrees up, 5 degrees down. And talk to us a little bit about the technology itself. Can the user manually dial it up, dial it down, or does it just work through sort of this sensation through the skin of the temperature of the individual at the time?
So our first generation device allows you to control the device from the device itself. So you can use the light bar to control the heating and cooling. And it's very rapid. You feel it immediately. We also have a companion app that allows you even more finite control. So you can actually offset the temperature by 11 degrees in either direction, so make it really warm or really cold. And you can also choose different modes that we've developed for specific therapies. So we have a fall asleep mode where the waveforms slow down over the course of 30 minutes. We have a all-night mode if you want to keep cooling through the night. And we have a hot flash mode for menopausal hot flashes.
Wow. So I was just going to say, could you tell us areas in which the technology has been used? And you've already mentioned 3. So tell us how the hot flash component works. And so this is Lioness magazine. It sort of caters to women. And so let's talk about that. So a woman is undergoing a menopausal event, a hot flash occurs. And does the thermometer automatically kick in and cool the body down by a certain number of degrees such that the hot flash completely is obliterated? And then once it comes back, is it a repetitive cycle every time the hot flash comes through?
So in the current incarnation of the device, the user's in control, which we found has been a good thing, because women who experience hot flashes will report that it's often preceded by a sense of anxiety or dread. There's an emotional feeling before there's the physical experience. There's a reason for this, and that's because hot flashes are not a temperature problem per se. Hot flashes are an overactivation of the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight response. So if a man ever wants to think about what it's like to have a hot flash, they only have to think about the last time they were spooked or maybe in a near miss accident. The same feelings that you have when you are startled is the feeling of a hot flash. And so if you can instigate that cooling at the onset of a hot flash, you can stop it in its tracks. Now, what we're doing today in terms of R&D is we are building out, collecting the data set and understanding the other biometric measures to be able to predict a hot flash before it starts and kick it into operation. So we're doing that at the University of Massachusetts Institute for Applied Life Sciences. And so we are well on our way to be able to predict a hot flash and stop it before it starts.
Wow, that's amazing. And so what other areas in terms of sort of therapeutic areas are you looking at? I know you've got several collaborations. You mentioned one right now, but you also have an effort with the J&J. Can you talk about what you guys are doing vis-a-vis collaborations and how you're deciding on what areas to work on?
That's a great question, because we never made any claims about this device. It was really put on the market in 2018 as a gadget. You know, your personal thermostat was kind of our tagline. After selling to 72,000 users in 170 countries, the customers started to tell us what they're using the device for. So kind of the opposite pathway of how you do it in biopharmaceuticals, right? You guys start in the lab and you go to the market. We went to the market and now we're going back into the lab. So we collected a body of real world evidence, and what came back when we asked people what they're using it for was thermal comfort, kind of first and foremost, menopausal hot flashes, and then men and women were telling us that they were using it for treatment-induced hot flashes caused by oncology drugs. Then we heard people suffering from symptoms of MS were using the device. We heard about Raynaud's syndrome. And then more recently, as we've seen more people suffering from dysautonomia, that is a symptom of the patients who have recovered from COVID. We have more and more COVID long haulers using the device for symptom management.
Wow. So that's, I mean, just thinking in terms of the commercial perspectives here, that's a broad market. And so are you guys, tell us a little bit about the size of your company. And are you also, I mean, you said 72,000 of these gadgets. I'm assuming with a little bit of marketing or with no marketing, but talk to us about how you're going to think about building out a marketing infrastructure to support everything you're now starting to dabble in.
That's a great question. We're most passionate about serving menopausal women because this is a huge unmet need. They suffer from not only hot flashes, but sleep disturbance and anxiety. No surprise, because that's all linked to an overactivation of the sympathetic nervous system. And there will be 1.1 billion women in menopause by 2025. Wow. So if we just serve that market successfully and bring relief, natural relief to those women, we'll be very happy. We will continue, though, to do the clinical research and trials that we have running in these more therapeutic spaces. And what we'd like to do there is partner with pharma or medical device companies alongside either traditional biologics or devices. So probably more of a B2B licensing model.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and so, I mean, speaking of sort of B2B, you guys are featured quite a bit in the press and the media. I was looking through your website earlier, and you've gotten picked up by Wired, Vogue, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, Good Morning America, among others. What has that done for you guys? I mean, has that influenced how you think about building out the company? I mean, how do you as a CEO now, you're driving this big bus, it's getting bigger, more people are noticing you. What is that doing to your plans and approaches that you're considering for the company?
Yeah, that's a great question, because initially we weren't sure. We had to experiment. So you mentioned the J&J work. We were getting a lot of feedback that maybe this was a placebo effect, right? Or maybe it was vaporware. And so as scientists in the company, not myself, of course, but the founders, we thought it was very important to validate the science. And once we were able to validate the science, the market really started to come to us. So nobody was talking about digital therapeutics 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. Nobody was talking about femtech 2 years ago. And nobody was talking about menopause until 1 year ago. And so we've just really dug our heels in with the consumers that are really happy with the product. And the market has kind of moved our way. And now we've been approached by CPG brands that are really interested in getting into this market.
Yep. So So are you building out a team, and to tell us a little bit about how many people you have in your team and how you allocate resources around this technology?
Yeah, so we're 22 people now. What we do strategically is build out our marketing team with a lot of contractors. Mm-hmm. And so it was very important for us to understand if we had to scale down rapidly, that we wouldn't be doing a number of layoffs. So we rely on a lot of third parties to help us on the marketing side, and that's very achievable. We focus on building tacit knowledge in the company with regard to science and the development of the waveforms and the technology, the hardware and the software. So for anybody thinking about building a direct-to-consumer business, it's easier than it's ever been. You know, you have tools like Shopify and the ability to host SaaS software that does your email marketing, and it all kind of ties together with plugins. And so once you've got things running, it actually becomes a really well-oiled machine, and your sales and marketing strategy kind of becomes a heuristic, because you're looking at a few unit economics. You're looking at your cost of customer acquisition, right, on a daily basis, because you're able to buy that media on a daily basis. You're looking at things like your return rate, and you're looking at the cost of the fluctuation in digital ad spend, and you're looking at your cost of goods. And so what happens is over time, you're starting to figure out how this heuristic works. And there are moments you can push on the gas if you've got the cash, and there are other moments you can kind of take your foot off the gas, if that makes sense.
No, completely makes sense. So Liz, how did you land at Embr? How did you decide? I mean, you've done a lot in your career. You probably could have done anything you wanted, given your sort of founder's experience and just early startup company experience. How did you land at Embr personally or professionally?
I was wrapping up my fintech company, and I got a call from a recruiter.
Okay.
And she told me about these 3 young men who had started this company, and it reached a inflection point where they weren't sure what to do next, because they had never worked in an organization or run a business. And I went to go meet David, Matt, and Sam, and I was so impressed with their willingness to bring on female leadership, because it's very rare that 3, quote unquote tech bros decide that they want a female executive. And making that decision is a big one, because the statistics are against us, right? We know that only 2 to 3% of available capital goes to female leadership. And so the fact that David, Matt, and Sam would take a bet on a female CEO was just incredibly compelling to me. And then looking at what the mission was, to harness the body's own systems for wellness, that really resonated with me. And then as a woman who is chronically cold in almost any restaurant or theater or airplane, I just love the technology.
Okay, so I have to ask you, because I fall into that same category. By the way, I always carry a scarf or a sweater in my purse. But my question to you is: do you use the gadget? Do you use it, and how well does it work?
Yes, I use the gadget, and especially the new one. We just launched a new product yesterday. It's the 2nd generation device. It is absolutely beautiful, very sleek, wearable, more powerful, longer battery life. I use the device for 2 things. One is falling asleep. So it's absolutely brilliant to fall asleep. Your intuition would be, oh, I should use cooling, right, to go to sleep. That's what they always say. We know from science that it's actually warming on the extremities can really help slow down the body. So our waveform is designed to slow down much like your respiration does over the course of 35 minutes. And I also use warming when I'm in environments where I'm uncomfortable. And I don't know, Ramani, if you experience being cold as almost being stressed, but your body starts to tighten up. You can't concentrate. You're almost in a state of stress, and it just cuts that off and puts you in a state of comfort.
And so you wear it on your wrist, and again, I'm just curious, do you actually, you feel the temperature change at your wrist and then it kind of permeates the rest of your body?
That's exactly right. It only takes 3 minutes before you feel a 5-degree temperature difference. This was validated by scientists at UC Berkeley, but we know in women, the difference is 9 degrees. And so women are much more sensitive to that temperature change. And so imagine you're in a room that's 65, you're in a conference room, for example, and if you can feel like it's 74, that's significant.
That is amazing. Okay, so you did talk a little bit about financing, or you talked about how the tech gurus who started the company got to a point where maybe they needed help. So tell us a little bit about funding. Where did you go? How'd you raise your cash?
Yeah, we raised a Series B from a leading investor in digital therapeutics out of Silicon Valley. And he really saw the promise of the technology, actually on the clinical side. So he was a medical doctor, and he said, boy, oncological hot flashes are a huge issue for drug adherence. Let's see where you guys can take this. So that's who led our Series B round. And then over the course of the last, I would say 2.5 years, we've raised about $13 million from companies that are either in hard tech, medical devices, or digital health.
Okay. And was the pitch difficult? I mean, do you guys have to really sell the concept of what value you bring, or the technology brings, and how you differentiate from other groups who are out there? I mean, are there other competitors out there to this wave technology?
No, we don't have any competitors yet. We have people purporting to be working on a prototype of what we do. The challenge that we have in fundraising is, from the market side, getting investors to understand that 1.1 billion women, which is a pipeline that's going to be consistently filled, right? Women going into menopause, is big enough. Mm-hmm. So believe it or not, it's something like 16% of the world population, and some male investors just don't see it as being interesting because it's menopause. The other challenge we have occasionally is, oh, you're just another wearable that's going to end up in a drawer. But the difference is that we are a haptic. We're not just measuring things. So, when you're wearing a Fitbit, you kind of learn what 10,000 steps feels like. But when you're a chronically cold woman and you want to have that therapy on your body, or you're having a hot flash, the adoption is going to be lasting and long forming. So those are the two areas that we have to really push on. The other thing is that you've probably heard this said, Ramani, is that hardware is hard. Hardware is a really hard thing to produce, especially in today's environment there's a massive semiconductor shortage. I don't know if you've read about that. And now that is actually pushing into raw materials such as plastics. And there's just always a lot of risk when you're producing a product globally, manufacturing in China and supply in East Asia. Challenging.
So with COVID and just challenges with, COVID, did that come in the way of you guys being able to access the components for putting this hardware together? And did that limit your ability to produce and really run your business?
We were very lucky that we have a very senior supply chain management guru that we actually pulled out of retirement to work for us. And he anticipated this happening. So we ordered all of our components for production this year with the new device. Where it did really impact us is in the development. So if in hardware, there's a moment that you transfer your design to manufacturing. Mm-hmm. It was at that critical moment that we were tooling up the factory that COVID hit. And we could not count on the design engineers in China to help us. And so we were slowed down. But for the most part, we worked around it as much as possible, and we're good to go for the next year with inventory on the shelf. So that's a relief.
That's great. So I want to take us back a little bit to the fundraising component. You talked about some of the male investors that you pitched to, not really appreciating perhaps the market that you were targeting and not understanding the extent of the market. You're a female entrepreneur. Can you talk, and this is Lioness magazine, which is catering to female entrepreneurs. Can you talk a little bit about challenges, if any, that you faced in fundraising, or did you feel it was an even playing field?
Oh, it's definitely not an even playing field. There are even times when I kind of sit in the background if I think that my audience is more receptive to the male founders. I think that understanding the data and the numbers behind what's happening in funding, if you understand that, you kind of have to play to your strengths sometimes, which is maybe putting your male co-founders forward. I guess, the biggest challenge is finding a metaphor for which male investors will pay attention.
Yeah.
And we were able to do that by talking about, the near miss accident and how that makes your body feel. And now imagine a woman going through that for 10 years, having 20 hot flashes a day. Do you think that's a problem? So.
Yep. Yeah, you need to translate it into an example or terminology or words that can be appreciated by the audience you're speaking to. Mm-hmm. To your point, sort of as we all know your audience when you're pitching. So let's pivot a little bit. You're a CEO, you're a female. There are a lot of women in the STEM field and in other fields even who want to grow their careers and do things that they didn't think they could do. It's the notion of if you see it, you can be it, which I truly believe in. But what are your thoughts about being a female leader? Do you show up differently because you're female? Are you your authentic self? I mean, talk to us a little bit about maybe your role as a CEO at Ember with respect to the 3 tech male colleagues and other people within the company. And I know you mentioned the challenges at times that you face with male investors, but tell us about your journey, if you will, to getting to where you are as a female entrepreneur, ultimately being the CEO here.
Yeah, I never had the goal to be a CEO. I love being an entrepreneur and a founder. I've always been actually second in command most of my career, kind of some people call the power behind the throne. Yeah. So I think it's been a really accidental journey for me, but I really love the role. And the advice I always give to younger women is to just follow your passion at every step in your career and you'll wind up in the right place. With regard to leadership style, I've always felt that women trying to be men it's not a good play because, as you mentioned the word authenticity, it's very important. You are a phony if you're not your authentic self, and authentic leadership is the most powerful leadership there is. And so I show up as a woman. That's who I am. That's who I'm comfortable being. And that's the leadership style that I use.
Yep, absolutely. And I've heard, in webinars I've been on, there's sort of 3 styles of leadership. There's the authentic, which we all should strive for. Then there's the adaptive, which is you're not quite yourself, but you're someone else because you just have to be given the circumstances. Mm-hmm. And then there's the performing self, which is you're really not yourself. You're putting on a show. And typically in that performing self mode, we're really just not standing behind who we are. We're really unauthentic. So I want to kind of come back to pivots in your career. Again, I think part of the listeners want to be nice for the listeners to get to hear about how you landed where you are. I know you said you sort of were passionate about, you are passionate about what you do, and I'm sure you've been passionate about what you've done in the past. But have you had mentors and or sponsors along the way, and how influential have they been to you?
Yeah, certainly there have been people along the way that have, I think, provided a mirror, which is what a good mentor will do, and convinced me of my potential when I actually didn't believe it. And the one thing that I've noticed that's consistent about my life and my career has been forcing myself out of my comfort zone So, I moved to Europe by myself. I started a life there. I moved back to the United States, to Boston by myself. I've gone into industries where I had no knowledge and had to start from the ground up instead of always building on something behind me, which maybe has not been the smartest career path, but it's made me pretty fearless in terms of I'm not really afraid of anything anymore. And if I don't understand something, I know I can learn it. And so, yeah.
It's interesting, not being afraid of fear. The term I use these days is like, you gotta be curious. You gotta embrace fear and be curious, which I know you do a lot of. So let's wrap up, Liz. I want to kind of leave on, kind of a higher note. You've been on a high here, but on a high note, which is, I think I read in your LinkedIn profile or in your bio somewhere that you are or were a parachute instructor.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, it's not exactly like skydiving.
Okay.
It's a program in the Boston Public Schools. And this is a great program. I encourage everyone to check it out, whereby they don't really want substitute teachers in there teaching children.
Got it.
So business people can volunteer for 1 hour slots and go in and teach kids. And it's just amazing program.
Oh, that's great. Okay, that's the term parachute. Okay,
yeah,
I took it literally, but thanks for clarifying.
Sure.
So the final question, I guess, is, if you had to tell the audience, tell the listeners what your superpower is, what would that be?
I think we touched on it earlier. It's just authenticity, trying to always be myself, because that allows me to also get insights and not operate from a place of fear or something that's not me. And people feel it, I think. Investors see it. My team sees it. So it's just trying to be myself and not be anything that I'm not.
Yep. That goes such a long way, because when you're yourself, whether it's your vulnerable self or your powerful self or your courageous self or your sad self or whatever the case may be, it just it builds trust and it builds a safe space for people to do the same, right?
That's right. Yeah. And we could use a little bit more of it.
I agree. Liz, it's been great chatting with you today. So on behalf of Lioness Magazine, I want to really thank you for taking the time to join me this afternoon. I know you just got off a board meeting, so appreciate you kind of taking the time post that to chat with me. And I want to thank our listeners also for joining. And I look forward to reconnecting with the Lioness Magazine listeners at the next session. So please stay tuned for that. And Liz, if you have any final comments you'd like to make, go right ahead.
I would just say, being a woman is already a superpower. And there's a lot of untapped potential for society because we just haven't been at the table. But things are changing very quickly. And if you look at all the data out there, we are a force to be reckoned with. So don't let fear get in the way. Step out of your comfort zone and go for it.
Absolutely. And you have shown this audience, you've shown me, you've shown yourself that you've certainly done that as well. So you're really talking the talk, walking the walk, et cetera, et cetera. So thanks again, Liz. Really great to catch up this afternoon, and we'll see you all later.
Thank you, Imani. Really enjoyed it. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.